Hey, deserving listeners, this is Chapter 4 in our deep dive on the Menendez brothers. Humberto is leading this deep dive. He is going over the details and then asking me some very interesting questions about psychology and psychotherapy. So, Berto, where did we leave off in Chapter 3?
Well, our brothers are in jail. They have been arrested. As we will recall, Lyle was arrested first. And Eric, although was out of the country, was playing tennis in Tel Aviv. He was convinced to come back to the States, and then he turned himself in. So they are now arrested, awaiting trial. Of course, these things do take time. So this is where I think a lot of our confusion also stems from, because even though the murders happened on August of 1989, the trial didn't start till 1993.
Wow.
Right. So, okay. So between 1990 and 1992, the brothers are in jail, and they're awaiting doing all the pre-trial motioning, finding lawyers, all these kinds of things.
They couldn't get out on bail or anything?
Nope.
Wow.
Not because probably the severity of the of the crime, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. So, a couple of things. One, there was a big fight over the admissibility of evidence. And of course, Dr. Oziel's tapes were front and center, right? Because that was the original thing that, as you will recall, the original thing that got them arrested in the first place, or got them to go and search and finally find was that Dr. Oziel's girlfriend or mistress
Slash client
finally went to the cops and said, hey, he's got tapes. And so then they went, they confiscated the tapes. But now the question is like, well, can we use the tapes in the trial, right? And of course, as you can imagine, the brothers' defense team was claiming like, no, that's doctor-client privilege. Of course you can't use any of that stuff. But the prosecutors were contending, actually, let me ask you, I wouldn't have known this, but what do you think the prosecutors might claim as why they should be able to use it?
The most Occam's razor case is that the data is too important. I suppose there's another wrinkle of, was this proper therapy to begin with?
Think back to what Dr. Oziel was feeling or claimed that he was feeling.
Afraid.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, so that's what they're...
The prosecutors said, hey, he felt threatened.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know why this
so I guess the argument would be that, well, that's the thing. When it comes to confidentiality and these cases where the government will demand our records, usually that's what they're doing, is they're demanding the client file or even our psychotherapy notes, which are notes just to ourselves, is that there's no statute that will specifically delineate between what is legal and what's not. We rely on very rare court precedent that only happens in particular states. So I think what they're basically arguing is a crime was occurring where you had a therapist or just a person who was under threat, which is illegal, right? A crime was occurring where these individuals were threatening him or making him feel unsafe or something along those lines. And therefore, when someone commits a crime against another person, even if the victim doesn't want to press charges, the government can still press charges. Therefore, we're considering a crime. And I don't know. As I talk through, it's like, well, but it's still, generally speaking, under the umbrella of confidentiality.
Yeah.
And plus, you'd have to, well, anyway.
But you can see why there was a dispute, right?
Yeah.
So this wasn't clear cut. It was so not clear cut that the dispute went to the California Supreme Court.
Oh.
Because, in fact, to your point, it's like, well, you could go either way with this, right?
Okay.
So, again, the brothers' defense team, by the way, just a parenthesis, this was also unusual even before we get to this piece, in that the brothers, they were going to have two separate trials. They were basically saying like, yeah, no, they have to be tried like in two different trials. Okay, so again, they're arguing these are client privilege. There's no doctor-patient privilege. Absolutely should not be admitted. Prosecutors are saying, wait a minute, Dr. Oziel was threatened, so therefore, and I don't know the details of what their therefore was, but essentially, therefore, hand wave, we should get access to these tapes.
By the way, were they pleading not guilty?
Oh, the brothers?
Yeah.
Yes.
Huh.
Start puzzling this. pleading not guilty, but they were not contesting that they shot their parents.
I see.
They were not pleading. They were pleading not guilty to murder.
First-degree murder.
To first-degree murder.
They're saying possibly manslaughter, which covers murders of passion that might be kind of justified because you're being harmed or something.
Yeah, they were going to argue self-defense.
Even though the parents weren't armed?
They felt that they were in imminent danger.
Like generally speaking, not in that moment.
Yeah.
But they felt that the parents were going to kill them?
So you could imagine such a situation, right? Like, let's say you live with an abusive spouse or something, and then you know that they're about to go, like, they're saying something, they're about to leave the room to go get their gun or something, right? So,
so that's what the argument was?
They're arguing, and we'll go to the details, the specifics, but yes, their argument was, we felt that it was us or them, and that's why we did this.
Physical harm.
Okay. Physical harm.
We've heard nothing.
First, what do you call it? Self-defense. So not guilty for first-degree murder.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a bad defense because they're the only witnesses and beyond a reasonable doubt, right? Although it's hard to imagine a jury, but all you need is one juror. Right?
All you need. So, anyway, so this dispute about the tapes went all the way to the California Supreme Court, and now, again, this is incredible how long these things take because they've been incarcerated since 1990. And then they've been going back and forth, arguing. This finally went to the Supreme Court in August of 1992. So 2 years, right? And that's incredible. I'm wondering what it must be like for all the parties because you have the aggrieved parties, let's say the relatives of Jose and Kitty, other sisters, other relatives, and they're waiting. And then you have them in jail. Let's say they were innocent, right? You're sitting in jail, and 2 years go by.
Yeah.
Just waiting for this one decision.
Yeah.
The California Supreme Court, August 1992, issues a ruling. They say 2 of the tapes, including portions where the brothers actually discussed the murders, were admissible under the dangerous patient exemption. Apparently, there was this dangerous patient exception.
Dangerous patient exception.
Yeah.
Huh. I mean, I don't know all the nooks and crannies of the law when it comes to this sort of thing, but I've never heard of that one. And this is in California, so there's a different set of laws, which is just so annoying. We just need a national statute around these and guidelines around this sort of thing. But right, so that was what I was thinking. So there must be some kind of precedent or some kind of standard that they're referring to.
Yeah, or unless this is but it sounds like they made a decision based on something that had already existed. Which
I wonder if it's actually an exception because it's actually in the favor of, originally it's in favor of the clinician, and that you have, let's say I have a client and the client is being threatening or even hits me or something, or does something, well, anyway, let's say just being threatening and coerces me to give them money or something, but doesn't actually put hands on me, so it's not clear that I was mugged.
And now you can't go report it or anything because, right.
So the exception is, look, I'm under threat, therefore I don't have to uphold. Yeah, but I wouldn't say that that's like a clear precedent, but it is an understanding. Maybe that's what they were referring to.
And I guess in this case, probably they had to determine, well, was he credibly threatened? Meaning, did he have enough reason to feel threatened and blah, blah, blah.
I don't think it would be hard to establish.
Well, apparently it was hard enough that it required the California Supreme Court, but in either case, they said 2 of the tapes admissible. And this is pretty big because it includes portions where they discuss the murders, right? But there was other portions, and specifically there was a tape where Eric describes the actual killings, where those were deemed privileged and excluded.
And you would think that if the defense is truly self-defense, then they would have discussed that, which could very much bolster their case, right? If they're crying, if Eric's crying and saying, I can't believe that it came to that, but you're my therapist.
That's a good point.
So.
And in fact, because you could imagine and then even as I'm going to shoot him, he's trying to grab the gun and he's like, I'm going to shoot you just like I said I would.
Yeah.
Right.
Or because if you felt under threat, of course you're going to tell that's something you're going to talk about. And if all of those conversations that were recorded, which it sounds like several sessions, right? And there's no moments where you even reference that, because that would, that's one of the things that helps in defense is like, before I even knew that I would have to defend myself, I was talking with someone that I thought it would never get out there. Sort of like if you're writing in a journal, right? If you can credibly demonstrate that the journal was honest.
That's an excellent point.
So the fact that it sounds like there was nothing in the tapes that indicated that.
Well, no, and to the point, like as we were saying, the defense didn't want any of these tapes included.
Yeah.
It's not like they said, well, we do want this one portion because that's when they said they were so scared.
Right.
They're saying like, no, like we don't want any of this stuff. And to your point, like, wait a minute. This would have been great if you were telling your therapist, you don't understand. I know it looks terrible, but 1 second later, we would have been dead.
And maybe this is skipping forward, but did the therapist, Dr. Oziel, claim that before the murders he heard Eric, because he was already in therapy, Eric, right?
Yeah.
Because of the burglaries. Was there any claim that Dr. Oziel said, well, before the murders even happened, Eric was telling me extensively about how physically abusive or intimidating the parents were?
No, he did not testify to, Dr. Oziel's testimony definitely did not include information of proving that, oh my gosh, this totally shows that they were under physical threat. And
so I have to say, if a twist happens as we go through the next chapters that demonstrates that they were under threat, then I just have to say, there's no evidence of that happening. So if that is a twist that happens, I tell you, I'm going to be shocked out of my socks.
What's a twist? It's a Shyamalan script.
I mean, really, it would be.
All right. Okay, so that's what the Supreme Court of California deems. So that becomes the path now. They're going to include this. Now the defense, I'm sure, has to adjust their plans just to, make sure they can, maybe cross-examine properly Dr. Oziel and so forth. Okay.
I'm going to pause you. Let's take a break.
Okay, let's do it.
Commercial break. All right, we're back from the break. Take it away, Berto.
All right. Now, by mid-1993, so again, ruling 1992, now by mid-1993, jury selection is underway.
Yeah, it's funny. The murders happened a month before I started my bachelor's degree. Mm-hmm. And then the jury selection happened when I graduated.
Oh my God.
So it just gives you an idea of how long. So I got a bachelor's degree in the time that it took to actually get to trial.
Rewinding to this time, I'm in high school. The 1990, 1993, I'm in high school, and I'm watching MTV pretty frequently. And this is where I start seeing those little clips of Kurt Loder. Right around this time, I think some of us normies are starting to maybe hear about this thing, even though it happened years ago. All right. Now, July 20 of 1993, the trial begins. Now, it's an interesting thing. I mentioned how jury selection was happening. Well, they actually needed two separate juries because they were having two separate trials. But they decided that because so many of the witnesses are the same witnesses and everything, that they were going to combine them into the same courtroom. But they were technically two parallel trials happening at the same time. They had them all in the same courtroom, same judge, two different lawyers, same prosecutor, and two different jury pools. Do you realize what is a very notorious or interesting fact about this trial that had never happened before?
Never happened before.
Well, actually,
live television broadcasting?
Oh, I say never, but it's probably the first major. Yeah. Live television. So there's this thing called court TV.
Huh. It's interesting how this, you hear about OJ and how that was a completely society-changing event. Mm-hmm. But it sounds like the Menendez brothers' whole situation was like the John the Baptist of the Jesus that was O.J. Simpson.
Yes, very good. We've offended no one. But that's correct. This was the first spectacle, the first courtroom spectacle. And there was this new channel named Court TV that was new, I think, or at least it wasn't very popular. And all of a sudden, it blows up because they're doing most of the trial live on Court TV. I find it very odd too because they say gavel to gavel, meaning that court will begin in session, and they had all of it just live on television, and people would actually tune in, which is incredible.
Well, weren't you one of the
For OJ.
Yeah.
Yeah. For OJ, I was one of those people.
Yeah.
Tied to the television.
It was tapping into something deep for you, a fear of unsafety in society, wanting to trust society, given that you had come from Colombia where you could not trust society or the government or institutions to protect the people. And you're watching this thinking, well, it's a open and shut case, but I hear some people are thinking he's innocent, or they're worried that he's going to get off scot-free. No. I need this to work out. And you're watching the trial and you're like, okay, this is very reassuring. They're going to win. And so you would obsess on watching, hoping that it would solve an inner anxiety. Well, what do you think? Do you think it actually overall, would you have been better off not watching?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, no. It hurt me because, yeah, I've talked about this before. This was a weird case where when I saw the chase on TV, like so many of us did, I naively, not understanding the legal system, I naively thought, oh, that's crazy. Okay, so I guess he's just going to jail because it's obvious. Like he's fleeing. He says he's suicidal. He's got a gun to his head. Obviously, he's guilty. So you don't need a trial, right? Like ipso facto, send him to jail. And so I just assumed that's what happens. Then I hear like there's this trial, and I'm like, okay, that's so weird, but like it's obvious. Okay, then the trial starts. And I start realizing how courtrooms and justice actually works, let alone that one was like a circus. But I was thinking, wait, how is this not obvious to everyone? With the jury is actually going to be. And then as the trial went on, I started getting more and more anxious because you're watching testimony and you're watching someone cross-examine them and contradict. And you're like, no, this is distorting reality. That's not what we all saw. What we saw. And so I think it caused anxiety. It caused me lack of sleep because I would stay up late. I missed classes, and I don't think it was good. I don't think it was healthy. But at this time, I didn't yet know or watch, other than, like I said, the brief little MTV News bursts here and there. Yeah. So trial gets underway. The prosecution is led by Pamela Bozanik and Lester Kuriyama. Kuriyama? Japanese, maybe?
Japanese American guy.
How would they have painted the brothers from what you've heard so far?
Prosecution?
Yeah.
Privileged, spoiled, liars, criminals, because of the previous burglaries.
So yes, they greedy, cold-blooded killers. And what do you think their the motive was that they presented?
Money.
Yeah,
that's the obvious one.
That they had.
I mean, it's even in their own defense.
That's right.
They were going to take us out of the will. Oh, great point.
That was their pretrial. Yeah,
but that's on the record,
right? That's right. Yeah. So they said yes. Look, these cold-blooded killers, greedy, cold-blooded killers. They knew that they stood to inherit $14 to $15 million estate. They had been told that they were afraid they weren't going to get it. So this is what's happening. They kill their parents. And
there's evidence that they bought a bunch of shit right after, if they didn't buy a bunch of things right after the death, then that would not necessarily negate the prosecution's case, but it certainly helped them,
No, absolutely. So they in fact, the prosecution pointed to the spending spree as evidence that basically they cared about the money, and definitely. Because even though, like we were saying, well, you never know how people grieve, but the prosecution definitely was going to make a case to the jury of like, hey, does this look like grief to you, right? And the other part of it was they absolutely were going to make this point that they themselves had said that their dad was threatening to cut them off financially, and they thought that he was going to remove them or had removed them from the will.
Yeah, I don't know if you're going to get to this, but when it comes to the grief point, similar to lie detector tests, from my point of view, these points should never be made by either side because grief is completely up in the air and variable and changes from minute to minute for some people. You can have an internal experience that isn't displayed. We cannot read people's minds just by watching them or filming them or witness accounts of how distraught they were or were not, or a 911 call. I mean, certainly it's admissible, but whenever they get into those arguments, similar to a lie detector test, both sides, they probably know that you can't conclude anything from someone's response after a loss, whether or not they're guilty or not. But they know or suspect that the jury doesn't know that. And so they make these points, and it can sway a jury. But I just wish that the whole thing wasn't brought up, because it's not good information either way.
Yeah.
My point. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I can imagine a lawyer maybe bringing up an expert like yourself or someone to say that, right? But then I could definitely also imagine if either they don't have that, or even if they have that expert, I could still imagine the prosecution using it, to be like,
they
hey.
would just because they would bring up their own experts,
Right?
So this is what really bothers me about the court system when it comes to experts, is that what there should be, which is hard to imagine this working practically, is that there should be a neutral court expert that actually also presents information, and a neutral legal person or team, or maybe even the judge, just passes the mic over to this neutral expert. And maybe the neutral expert doesn't even know the case. They don't have any skin in the game. And they just educate the jury on what the science is, what the consensus is. Because if I were hired by, say, the defense to say, you can't conclude anything by the fact that they were not bawling their eyes out all the time and that they were spending money, that doesn't say anything. It doesn't say they're guilty or innocent. You just can't know.
That makes sense.
Well, the prosecution will easily find an expert to say the opposite, to bring up research to demonstrate the opposite. And so as a jury, you're left wondering, and your own bias will probably push you one way or the other. This is why Amanda Knox got convicted, eventually overturned by the Supreme Court in Italy. But this happens all the time. And as a jury member, what are you supposed to think?
Right.
And you're not even supposed to look up information on the internet. You know what I mean? During the trial.
So you can be swayed.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't Google, what's the consensus? It's just two guns for hire who will say whatever the legal team wants them to say, seemingly,
Yeah.
And it's hard to know what you're supposed to
They'll
think.
say whatever they can until they get disbarred, the experts until they get
that almost never happens.
Yeah.
You can say almost anything, or you can say some pretty ridiculous things as an expert witness in psychology.
And you don't pay the price.
Well, what price would you pay?
I was thinking, lose your professional license.
That would almost you would have to be egregiously neglectful.
So really,
because if it's opinion and it's based on your take on a thing and you're cherry picking research studies, there's nothing unethical that's happening, but it's not representing the consensus.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay, so you wanted to watch this video of the court,
and we don't have to watch the whole thing, but I put it at a time that's going to be interesting.
And is this Dr. Oziel?
This is
right
Dr. Oziel.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's watch this.
And I don't know if he said we killed our parents, but I asked him, you mean you killed your parents? He said yes. Well, he told me that it began with the plan to kill the parents actually began in a situation where Eric was watching a BBC television show or movie, I'm not sure which it was, that had to do with the theme of the person in the film killing their father. And at some point in the watching of it, Eric called Lyle in the room and shared with him what the content was of the movie. At that point, it evolved into a discussion about killing the parents, most particularly the father first, and then the parents.
This is Dr. Oziel. This is the famous Dr. Oziel, and this is what I was saying in one of the. He
really is not what I expected. He looks like an accountant.
Yeah, he does have that.
I mean, no shade, but.
It's funny you say that. That's going to come up in a second in one of the other videos. But basically, this is what I was mentioning, where Eric told him that he was watching this show, and in the show they killed the dad, and so they're like, "Hey!" Now this was the story he fed Dr. Oziel It's unclear if like that was literally happening. But yeah, so Dr. Oziel has this whole testimony where he talks about it. And of course, they ask him about the tapes and all these other things. The next video I sent you is his mistress.
I think it was very unhealthy on my part to be involved and participate and be manipulated into the things that I was manipulated into.
So this is interesting because they're asking her to weigh whether she thinks it was right for what was happening, right? And then she's actually, at least at this point, self-aware and says like she doesn't think it was right. Her involvement wasn't right. So she felt used, she felt manipulated, but she also acknowledges that it's like it wasn't healthy for her to be involved, which kind of speaks a bit to the idea that the doctor was kind of manipulating her.
Right. I mean, I'm reading between the lines, but what it sounds like by this point, she looks back on the relationship with Oziel is the way they're pronouncing it.
Oziel, right? Or they said Oziel.
Well, I heard both.
Yeah.
Oziel and Oziel.
Yeah.
That she is looking back and saying that her whole relationship with him was manipulative and harmful to her, which is almost always the case. We actually study this and will check in with people after they've been harmed by therapists in this way, and the rates of PTSD is really, really high. I can't remember the exact stat, but it was something. One study was like 70-80%, which is really something. When we go through trauma, like wartime trauma, soldiers watching people die or they almost die, the rates of PTSD is not that high. I can't remember the exact percentage, but somewhere in the range of 10-20% or something.
Yeah.
So for clients having been in a romantic sexual relationship with their therapist and after to suffer from high rates, and that's just one of the bad things that can happen from this, right? There's the demoralization, the lack of trust of therapists or people, or the grief that you're going through, or the shame or whatever. PTSD is just one thing that we can sort of measure. But anyway, so it sounds like Judalon Smith is saying, yeah, I think that the whole thing was one big manipulation and unhealthy for me. She's saying that looking
Which
back.
explains why she wanted to go to one of the reasons she wanted to go to the cops is she felt used and manipulated. Okay, one more clip from Judalon. This one relates to your comment earlier about you not having pictured Dr. Oziel in a different way. So this is her opinion.
Okay.
Do you remember telling the police that
Oh,
when you
yeah.
talked to them?
Oziel knew I wanted to have children, and he lied to me, claiming that he tried to make himself be everything I wanted.
But you wanted to have children, and you indicated to the
I
police...
would not want children that looked like Dr. Oziel. So,
Ms. Smith, Dr. Oziel failed...
do not try to alter, what is real about my situation with Oziel. This was not a romance.
That was brutal. This is
Well,
famous.
even the judge was laughing
Even
a little
the judge
bit.
is laughing. Yeah.
Yeah. So we hear a lot of laughter, which is interesting, and it makes me wonder: was even the jury laughing? I don't know.
I don't know.
Hopefully not.
One thing that ended up happening.
I
Obviously,
mean, because it's fun. It's okay to laugh, but as a judge, you don't want to indicate that you're
right.
siding one way or the other. Or
This is one of the aspects that made this trial infamous. Is that way before OJ's trial, this was already very circusy, and this her testimony, although it ended up being valuable, but it's very long. This is only one of the parts of her testimony, so it's like 3 hours of testimony at least. And towards the end, apparently, even the judge was like getting tired because she would keep throwing Dr. Oziel under the bus and making all these other comments. But eventually, it started feeling not relevant anymore. But yeah, so this was infamous. She obviously was a key witness because she was the one that turned in the information that initially got them. And she also could testify, could basically validate that, yes, she had seen the tapes, she had heard the tapes. That all lended credence and stuff. But then there was all this other drama of that she was the mistress and like this.
makes me wonder if all the budding screenwriters in Hollywood and Beverly Hills really absorbed this story, because forevermore, therapists, if depicted in a TV show or movie, would always be having sex with a client or
Right.
acting unethical or unprofessional or
This became the template.
yeah.
Okay. So now let me ask you this. So you know that the defense is going to claim, hey, this is self-defense. So what do you think they're going to do? And I'm going to give you a hint. Leslie Abramson had been building a reputation for being a lawyer who used a specific kind of defense. And it was a specific kind of defense that then another dude, what's this guy? He's a famous lawyer too, wrote a whole book about this defense and kind of like poo-pooing it, throwing shade.
At the time, sexual abuse was emerging into consciousness in a way that hadn't before, beginning in the 80s. And, it was sort of a pro and a con in that you had greater awareness of sexual abuse. And I don't even know if this is what it is, but you had greater awareness of sexual abuse, which is good, to acknowledge that it happens and that it is bad and that it's a lot more prevalent. It's not something that happens, 1 out of a million, which is the way that most people considered it in the past. So that's good. On the other hand, it began to be used in this really disingenuous way in courts or in trying to take someone else down or in custody battles, you know what I mean? And it raises this difficult process of trying to determine the truth, right? Because by its nature, it's almost always behind closed doors and there's just two people. And then you have a victim who, if you're mugged, then you're much more likely to report that. If you're sexually abused by your parent, almost nobody says anything, particularly back then. So it is hard to differentiate between people that just make it up after the fact and those who actually went through something like that. So that's one possibility, is that the Abramson, the bomb is that it's sexual abuse, and maybe that even happened. Maybe that's your big twist. I guess that's what I'm sure. So, and maybe there's actually compelling evidence that they were sexually abused by the parents. It wouldn't be the first time that would happen. What other bomb would there be? That there was a third ringleader, maybe like the therapist put them up to it or something. I could see that, right? That the therapist manipulated, because we've already established he's manipulative, and so he manipulated Eric, who manipulated Lyle or something. I don't know. What's going on?
I like that. The abuse excuse. Leslie Abramson was getting a track record. The very previous trial she had won was, I think she got this a guy off on the abuse excuse. She had been criticized about it. I think it's Alan Dershowitz wrote this book about the abuse excuse. They use the abuse excuse. But Kirk, buckle in, because this turns from, oh yeah, well, we were abused, so we were scared, into one of the most harrowing, horrible stories of abuse that I had heard. And when I was doing the research and I was like getting to this point, I was absolutely with the prosecution. I'm like, greedy, cold-blooded killers. We'll see how you feel when we're done viewing evidence, though.
I'm getting chills.
Yeah.
M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah.
It's happening.
The phone was on the whole time.
Bruce Willis is actually a ghost.
Yes.
Sorry for the spoiler.
Spoilers alerts. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's take a break. We get back. More details on this.
Harrowing details.
So become a patron to hear the rest of this episode, along with every chapter full of this deep dive and all the other stuff we've done. Otherwise, please take care of yourself, because
you deserve it.
What note is that? G?
It's called I Don't Have Perfect Pitch.
Oh, E. I was way off.